Computer. There you go.
We are missing some people, but they're lost.
We should get started. Yeah.
Okay, so got it. Okay, so what I wanted to do today was with the we just celebrated Rosh Chodesh Shvat, the Hebrew month of Shvat, of course, which is known for Tu B'Shvat, the New Year of the trees. And so originally that whole idea of new, does anyone know why, like the root of that? Oh, we just had someone join us. Does anyone know the root of the New Year of the trees? Like, where does that come from? No. So it's sort of interesting. I'm actually going to sit down now. It's kind of interesting that my desk is going down. And it's in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says there are several New Years, one of which is as Rosh Hashanah, of course. But the New Year for the tree, it's a system of designated. It's sort of like, think of it as like a financial year, right? It's a system of how to tax or how to account for tithing for fruits for your produce. So, for instance, you had an obligation to provide to the temple a certain amount of your produce. So with a fruit, how would you know, especially in growing season, like how would you know which year it went in? Like Rosh Hashanah wouldn't actually be a very good year for that to do that, because you need to, right after Sukkot, you need to pick everything. So basically the idea was that if that Tu B'Shvat was before, Tu B'Shvat was sort of the new year for the trees. Think of it as a fiscal new year. So it was really according to the tithing and taxation accountability. Of course, in recent years, that's now changed, and Tu B'Shvat has become this sort of Jewish environmental day. So what I thought we would do today is we would study two texts from the Talmud that talk about planting trees. And what I want to do is I wanted to maybe I wasn't a draw, which is okay. I thought there would be more people. So I had this vision of breaking down into groups. Maybe we'll still break down into smaller groups, but we'll see. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to study these two texts, and I wanted to kind of go through them as a group, so just sort of read through them, get a good understanding, and let me talk for a while. Then I wanted to go through again to both texts, and then I wanted to break down into a discussion groups, and you to compare and contrast these texts, and to talk about which ones you thought were more compelling and for what reasons. They're clearly from the same. They have the clearly the same like literary root, which is the idea of someone planting a tree for the next generation. And many of you are familiar with that story. It's actually hanging out on a mural outside of my window over here in the office. But there's actually two different stories, at least two that I'm familiar with, on this like person planting a tree, and so I want to go over those, and I want to hear from you which ones that you feel, what you think is more compelling, why, the different lessons. And there's all sorts of, they're wild texts, so the texts sort of speak for themselves. And so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And you know what, maybe let's see how this goes. Maybe we'll just stick all together, because it's kind of like a nice little group here. So let's see how it goes. Okay. And now with this group, I probably could have brought some Hebrew in, but I didn't. Actually, maybe I could still. Okay, you know what? No, let's just stay on that. Let's just stay on this, because if I need to go over to the Hebrew for something, I'll do that. But why don't we have someone read this text straight through and nice and slowly read it through. And then I'll go with you line by line. Okay. Could someone volunteer to read it through? Go ahead, Marty.
You need to mute.
Unmute, Marty.
Don't make any mistakes when I'm muted. The Gemara relates another story about Choni Hamagel.
Okay, point. let
Rabbi
me-
Yo-
I'm sorry. So
ahead.
I'm going to interrupt you at some points. I apologize. So this translation is from this set of books that are behind me, and it is both a translation and at points sort of an interpretation. I mean, all translations are interpretations, but it, if you want to see the text, like how anyway, that's just a point to know that this is not an exact, it's a translation, and there's also explanation with interwoven into it. So anyway, go ahead.
As if I can just add one word, the way the Talmud is written, there's often gaps in the text.
Correct.
So
Yeah,
the interpretation is filling in those gaps.
right.
Helps us understand it better.
Right. And they try, the author here, who's Steinsaltz, tries to stay within kind of the implied text, like whatever, if there's a clear implication, he tries to just elucidate what that clear implication is, but nevertheless, it is interpretive. Okay, go ahead, Marty.
So Rabbi Yochanan said, all the days of the life of that righteous man, Choni, he was distressed over the meaning of this verse, a song of accents. When the Lord ascents. When the Lord brought back those who returned to Zion, we were like those who dream.
Shir Hamalo Peshuv Adonai et Shivat Zion Hayinu Kechol.
Kechomim.
That's the pasuk. That verse is sung, for those of you who can't identify my singing, and I would have no idea why you would not be unable to do such. But that is the verse that is meant to introduce Birkat Hamazon, the prayer after eating for Sabbath and festivals. So it's a celebration. You add that Psalm 126. And then also there's other, like all these like Kabbalistic traditions with this Psalm, that you use it in moments of celebration and joy. Like when a baby is born, there's a tradition of including this Psalm and keep putting like a little copy of the Psalm in the baby's nursery crib as a way of bringing joy to the baby. Okay. So anyway, so Rabbi Yochanan said that Choni, and this is, we know Choni, the Gemara is continuing on the stories of Choni Hama'agel, Choni the circle maker, and he is kind of like this mysterious Talmudic figure who is equal parts, depending on the story, sage and clairvoyant and interloper. He's able to get a lot of rain. So the story that's prior to this is how Choni is able to intercede during droughts, and his prayers are answered by God. And even though it confounds the rabbinic sages as to why his prayers would be answered, they're like, we're not going to mess with it because it's Choni and he's special. So anyway, that's Choni Hama'agel. Why he's Choni the circle maker is a matter of debate. But anyway, that's who we're talking about. So anyway, Choni Hama'agel, Choni the circle maker, is confounded by this verse, a song of ascents, Shir Hamalot, Beshuv Adonai et Shivat Zion, like when they were brought back to the Shivat, the captives were brought back to Zion. Hayinu Kecholmim, we were like dreamers. So Choni Hama'agel is confounded by that. How is he confounded? Go ahead, Marty.
So he said to himself, is there really a person who can sleep and dream for 70 years?
Okay, pause there for a second. How is Choni reading? Like, are you confounded by this verse?
Yes.
You're confounded by the verse, you're confounded by Choni.
By Choni.
Right, why are you confounded by Choni?
Well, where does he get 70 years out of this?
Oh, because the Babylonian, thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
so
The Babylonian
okay.
exile
Exile was 70
is
years.
70 years. So this
And they're dreaming about returning.
Yeah. Thank you. So I should, yes. So the psalm is written presumably at the return of the Babylonian exile. So the Babylonians, we were exiled to Babylon, and then we're returning. And when the Lord brought back those who returned to Zion, i.e., from the Babylonian exile, we were like those who dream. So then Choni says to himself, is there really a person who can sleep and dream for 70 years? Now, how is Choni reading this verse? Or what's Choni's question show?
It sounds like he's reading it or taking it literally.
Right. And it seems like, and would you read that literally, that verse?
No.
Exactly. It's sort of like, come on, like Choni here is being like sort of this overbearing literalist, right? And so it's interesting, and that kind of shapes the story a little bit, right? So he says to him, is there really a person who can sleep and dream for 70 years? Now let's get ready. We're going to get a little Rip Van Winkle here, because then the text is going to take us in this overly literal way. So go ahead, Marty.
How is it possible to compare the 70-year exile in Babylonia to a dream?
Okay, now we're going to show you. Go ahead.
One day, he was walking along the road when he saw a certain man planting a carob tree. Choni said to him, "This tree, after how many years will it bear fruit?" The man said to him, "It will not produce fruit until 70 years have passed." Choni said to him, "Is it obvious to you that you will live 70 years, that you expect to benefit from this tree?" He said to him, "That man himself found a world full of carob trees. Just as my ancestors planted for me, I too am planting for my descendants." Choni sat and ate bread. Sleep overcame him, and he slept. A cliff formed around him, and he disappeared from sight and slept for 70 years. When he awoke, he saw a certain man gathering carobs from that tree. Choni said to him, "Are you the one who planted this tree?" The man said to him, "I am his son's son." Choni said to him, "I can learn from this that I have slept for 70 years. And indeed, he saw that his donkey had sired several herds during these many years." Choni went home and said to the members of the household, "Is the son of Choni Hamagel alive?" They said to him, "His son is no longer with us, but his son's son is alive." He said to them, "I am Choni Hamagel." They did not believe him. He went to the study hall, where he heard the sages say about one scholar, his halachot are as enlightening and as clear as in the years of Choni Hamagel. For when Choni Hamagel would enter the study hall, he would resolve for the sages any difficulty they had. It sounds like Eliyahu, but okay.
Right. Yeah. Good.
Choni said to him, "I am he." But they did not believe him and did not pay him proper respect. Choni became very upset, prayed for mercy, and died. Rava said, "This explains the folk saying that the people say, either friendship or death, as one who has no friends is better off dead."
Wow. Okay, so let's pause here for a second and let's digest. Does anyone want to give us first, I know it's a lot, a synopsis of what happened here? What happened? Raise either your, can I see everybody? Hold on, I gotta make this bigger. What happened in this text? Just unmute yourself. Go ahead and just talk.
Okay, this is Gary. Choni happened upon some person who was planting a tree. He inquired whether or not the tree was going to produce fruit, found out it would take 70 years. And the man planting the tree told him that he's planting it for his son's son. And then, for some reason, Choni himself fell asleep and was hidden by a cliff, and then awoke 70 years later to find the progeny of the original guy planting the tree, now harvesting from that tree.
Good.
And he asked him the question, "Are you the man?" No, he said, "I'm the son's son," as was foretold by the man.
Right, because 70 years is like 2 generations, not 1 generation. Okay.
So then Choni goes home. A lot of time has passed, and people don't obviously recognize him, or either in his family or at the study hall, and that distresses him greatly, and he dies.
Good. Good. Reactions. Oh, and so Gary, the reason that very good synopsis there. Excellent. The reason that all this is told is why? Shir Hamalu Beshuv Adonai et Shivat Zion Hayinu Kecholmin. Someone's got to explain to Choni that this verse can be taken literally and still be true. So it's like this weird thing, like Choni like takes something that's clearly a simile, like we were like dreamers. And I mean, the Cholmim, like the text introduces itself as like it's an image, it's as clearly a simile. Choni gets all literal and then is actually proven that literally this could come true. And this is all as a way of proving a point to Choni that pasuk is true. Okay. Any thoughts about this text? Anything that stands out? Because it's sort of like Choni, who's like this, and Marty mentioned like this Elijah, like he does have that, like there's lots of little flavors here. You have like the Elijah flavor. Wait, before I go there, Jill, what other flavors, like what other motifs do we find in this text? We have the Elijah motif. When was the Elijah motif, Marty?
Well, the phrases that are in dispute in the Talmud that end up with no resolution always end with a phrase that refers to the fact that when Elijah comes, he'll give us the answer. It'll be
It's called in the Gemara, it's called a teku, which is an acronym for Tishbi, the Tishbi, Yitaretz, Kushiot, Uva'ayot. That the Tishbi, Elijah, Te'aretz will answer Kushiot, like problems, Uva'ayot, and like textual problems. So Elijah is going to clear it all up. We don't have the answer. Teku, when Elijah comes, he'll clear it. So there's an Elijah kind of piece in here. What other legends, like what else do you see in this text?
Well, the carob tree is repeated over in several places. This isn't the only one.
Right. It's interesting. In the other text, it's actually not a carob tree. I don't know. Is anyone like into is horticulture? Anyone's? I don't know what has a longer period of growth, a carob tree or a fig tree. But in the other text, it's a fig tree. It's not a carob. And that's important because you'll see in the other text, you'll see that the period, you'll see it's actually kind of different, the other text. Okay, Dennis and then Jill.
Yeah. Rabbi, I have a question. This story is very familiar to me. Does this appear? Have I heard this before, or does it appear elsewhere?
Yeah. It appears elsewhere. The more common one, like every rabbi's got one of these this sermon in their pocket, and like this is the most common. Like every capital campaign uses this, like, as was planted for me, I will plant for my, future generations. Like every single capital campaign in Jewish history, like, will you do a capital campaign and we'll use it too? Like, as has been planted for me, I'll plant for the future. But they take it actually from the other story, mostly because I think the Hebrew is a little easier. This is from the Gemara, so it's Aramaic. It's a little tougher. Yes, you have heard this story before. Okay, Jill, you were going to say something.
I was going to say two things. One, about planning for your descendants, which you just mentioned, and the other is the way the story ends. Without friends, you're dead, which was kind of a stark boom.
Yeah.
You know, here you are. They didn't acknowledge him, so he dies.
Right. It's totally like, it's this crazy story because it's like, it could have, like, where should have, like, if we were going to write a Hollywood ending for this, where would have the story ended?
It should have ended with him being worshipped virtually or venerated. He's the guy who's supposed to answer questions for us now. We should have been welcomed back. But
Good. Okay, so when you should have gone into the study hall, they should have said, Bruchim Abayim.
You're right.
Okay, good. So if you didn't want to go there, we're going to talk about the study hall and the home in just a second. I don't think it's coincidental that those are the two places that he visits. But if you couldn't change the story, but just had to chop the story, where would you chop it? If you wanted it to end nicely, where would have it ended?
I would have cut out the part about how you die if you don't have friends.
Right. And so presumably then you would have cut out the whole Beit Midrash and the whole home thing. You would have ended the story with him encountering the planter's grandson. And then Choni could have like went off and died like a happy man, knowing that the world was, that this intergenerational relationship is firm, and that as people had planted before, or it could have even been nice if the grandson says, and I'm going to continue planting, I'm also planting, something like that would have been lovely. But then the text takes this like super kind of like dark turn where he goes to the study. He goes first to the house. What happens when he gets home? No one recognizes him. Then he goes to the study hall. And it's almost cruel here in the study hall. They're still talking about him. They're like, oh, this guy, meaning a reference to some other scholar. This guy, we don't know who they're talking about. He elucidates law just as clearly as Choni Hama'agel did. And then Choni's there. And he's like, hey, that's me. No, get out of here, you old nut job. Like, no. And then he has to sit in the corner, disrespected. They're revering his study, but they don't revere him because they don't believe him. So he sits there alone and ostracized. And when he was at home earlier, no one recognizes him. They don't believe him. Like, no, the grandfather's home. This can't be the same guy. So it's like the two center places, I see you, Dennis, of his life, the home and the Beit Midrash. The anchors of a person's identity are pulled out from under them, right? It's so, Dennis, go ahead.
So is this the antithesis of the revering the past generations? I mean, you plant trees for the future, but you disrespect.
I don't think so, because they respect his teachings, and they respect the plant, and they just don't believe him. They respect what happened I think there's a different lesson there. It's not that they don't venerate the past, they just think the past is in the past, and this guy who's in the present can't be from the past. They just don't believe in the time travel piece. It's not that they don't, if someone walked into my office now and said, I'm George Washington, I have Jewish Family Services on the phone, right? It's not that I disrespect George Washington. It's just, I don't believe them. And so I wonder here if similarly, there's a supernatural component here of the story that makes it's sort of, like I watch all these Marvel movies now with my kids. And it's often like the superhero, no, it's really me, I'm Spider-Man, and often that's not, they're not believed. And then often this actually feels like a Marvel, like often the superhero is plagued. That's very Marvel. And so here there's that seems to be like Choni then dies, like but what's interesting, and there's a whole discussion, like, are those like, what's his last prayer? his last prayer is to die. And what does he die of?
Loneliness.
Ostracization, loneliness. He had a normal life. He was respected in the study hall, really respected. He had a family. And all to prove this verse true, that all ends. And he lives this like crazy supernatural thing. And then and it's shown to him. So that, that is true, that someone can do this. And the intergenerational, it's a beautiful, the whole like, oh, they planted for us, we'll plant for the next generation is kind of superseded, right? Because it ends so like chevruta or mituta, which is like the last line, give me fellowship or give me death. I see Rosalie and then Gary wants to say something too. Go ahead.
Yeah, I see a different layers here. In the beginning, we see that a tree or trees are planted for the descendants. And then as we go further along, we recognize, yes, this is a good thing. But Honi disappears, and he was very popular and people listened to him in his current environment at a current time. But now he disappears for 70 years and a lot has happened. Of course, people, let's face it, nowadays we listen to people who tell us about what's going on in the world, the currency. If somebody disappears for 70 years and then comes back, we're going to be hard pressed to listen to that person. So Honi comes back, but Honi's part of the past and it's not current. If he had stayed alive and continued with his sagacious words, then people would have listened to him and recognized him, etc. But now he just comes back and people don't believe that he's Honi. And so he died in the past. It's like his reputation died when he fell asleep. And now he's coming back and people don't know him. So, it's different layers of interpretation here.
Yeah.
And at the end, he dies in a sad situation. But maybe Jill's right that he didn't have friends and he didn't have motivation to live any further. For one thing, people weren't listening to him and didn't believe he was Honi. And the other is just no friends or family, and that is a killer.
Right. So out of his context, he ceases to be who he was, and then so this beautiful text of like intergenerational dependence is upended by this like incredible statement about loneliness and social ostracization. It's very powerful, especially now. I read this book, which is written by Jeffrey Rubenstein, who's a professor of rabbinics at NYU, and he takes this tale and does some cross literary examination, looks into different cultures. So like this whole like Rip Van Winkle thing that's going on. I think he's that the Talmud's the first time. There are other places that kind of, obviously other cultures kind of have the same, the idea of like the person who falls asleep or the travel, time travel kind of thing. But the Honi story ends sadly, and most of those don't, which is really sort of interesting. Yeah, Jill.
Well, if he was so well respected, even though the current group of people in the study hall never met him, but if he was so well respected, why didn't anybody, sit down and try to talk to him and try to figure out, gee, is it really possible that this is him? There was a certain lack of respect for who he was, by at least given the details we get in the story, for their ready dismissal of him. The story could have ended differently.
But I think there's things that someone could say to you that are so outlandish that you would cease to take them seriously. Like if someone walked into your house and said, "I am from Mars."
Sure, but some people in Bible stories lived a really, really long life, like 100 and whatever years old.
Right. No, that's a good point. Right. So here, but I think in this case, it's meant to be that he was already older, and in the Talmudic times, no one like 70 was a good run. Not that 70 is a good run any longer, but it is
I hope not.
right. But not that but I'm just saying that I think the text wants to stand out that like Choni, like what Choni is saying is literally unbelievable to these people. And he's unable, and I thought Rosalie explained it beautifully, he's unable to then like become rooted again in this new frame, like he's out of context. And it's so sad. And the next story that follows in the Gemara is a story, if I'm not mistaken, about his grandchildren. So it's sort of like, and then like I think like there, so like he's more known, Choni, like he's known for like the prior story is about him making as the rain thing that I explained before, that he's able to get rain. And then it seems like whenever there was no rain, like his grandkids did the same thing. Like they were the rain family. They could, they did the rain dance and they made it rain. In fact, that's so it's an interesting story. I want to compare that now with the next story. Okay. And Dennis, tell me if this story sounds familiar. Okay. So let me share my screen. Hold on. Happened to. Hold on 1 second. Give me 1 second. This is not correct. Hold on. Okay, I am having a hard time with this. Hold on. My Wi-Fi is. I apologize. I thought something saved. It did not. Hold on. Give me one more minute. So the next text is here. Oh, okay. Here. Good. I think I was going. Okay.
There it is.
There it is. Okay, good. All right. So this is what we studied. So I think if you had to answer these questions, which elements of the text do you find most compelling? We've talked a little bit about what elements of the text you find most challenging. Yeah. And according to the text, which lesson appears to supersede the others? For me, this text quickly becomes a text about loneliness and no longer about, and that's what you're left with. Chaverto mituta is how give me fellowship or give me death, is how it ends. Okay. Now, this is a very different story from the Midrash Tanchuma. And it's also found in Midrash Rabbah. They're kind of the same story. I took this one because it has an English translation, and so this is the part that we wanted to read. And Dennis, this is going to sound familiar to you. So, would anyone like to read this out loud?
Sure.
Go ahead, Jill.
There's a story about the Emperor Hadrian, that he was going to war and traveling with his troops to fight with a certain country for having rebelled against him.
Now, by the way, Hadrian was like, does anyone know who he is in history?
Well, Hadrian's Wall, he went up all the way up to Scotland or wherever. I mean, he was, that's all I know about him.
Right, yeah, he was a conqueror. And also he puts down, he think about there's the Great Revolt against Rome, which leads to the destruction of the Second Temple. And then about 50 years later, there's the Bar Kokhba Rebellion, which is backed by Rabbi Akiva, which is sort of like their, I'm reading this great book on Jerusalem by Montefiore. And it talks really beautifully about he does this. It's a great book. It's the history of Jerusalem. But anyway, Hadrian puts down the Bar Kokhba rebellion. So, and that kind of changes the trajectory of Jewish political thinking from, hey, we can take down the Romans, to we should just be kind of quiet citizens in the diaspora and wait till the storm passes. So anyway, that is who Hadrian is. So there's no love lost between Jews and Hadrian, okay? In fact, in the other version, it says, and Hadrian, may his bones be turned into dust. Like there's no like they kind of like huh, on Hadrian, but in here it doesn't have that. So go ahead. There's a story about the Emperor Hadrian. He was going to war, traveling with his troops to fight a country that rebelled against him. Go ahead.
Now he found a certain old man who was planting fig saplings. Hadrian said to him, "You are an old man. Why are you persisting in taking the trouble to toil for others?" He said to Hadrian, "My Lord Emperor, here I am planting. If I am worthy, I shall eat of the fruit of my saplings, but if not, my children will eat." The emperor spent 3 years at war, and after 3 years he returned. What did that old man do? He took a fruit basket, filled it with the first fruits of beautiful figs, and drew near to Hadrian. He said to him, "My Lord Emperor, take these figs, for I am the same old man whom you found when you were on your way to the war. When you said, 'You are an old man, why are you taking the trouble to toil for others?' See, the Holy One has already found me worthy to eat some fruit from my saplings. Now this fruit in my fruit basket is from those saplings." Hadrian said to his servants, "Take it from him and fill it with gold coins." And so they did.
Okay, great. And now there's a great story that happens next to this. So you want to hear the story before we go into this story? You want to hear the story that happens next to this? So like the neighbors see this. They see the old guy go with a bucket of fruit to the emperor and come back with gold coins. So the wife of the neighbor, "Hey, bozo, go to the backyard, fill up a bucket, bring it to the emperor, and let's make some money on this." So now remember, is Hadrian a good guy or a bad guy?
Bad, boo.
He's a bad guy. So the guy does this, listens to his wife. It's a misogynistic text here, just a little warning. So the guy fills up his bucket, brings it to Hadrian, and Hadrian's troops beat the you-know-what out of the guy. Like, what the hell are you doing? We're not giving you, And then he returns and says to his wife, "Look what you made happen to me." And then the text concludes, and that is the kind of trouble that a wife will get you into.
Whoa. Okie dokie.
Yes. So, I didn't highlight that text, but anyway, it's not a great one. So apart from that misogyny, we ended it. We stopped short of that. But what this text, which before they visit the neighbors, tell me about that about this text. What's similar? What's different?
Well, to me, what's different is that the old man is saying, if he leads a good life, he'll be able to eat of the fruit.
Right.
But if not, his children will get the fruit. That's a very different message from the other one.
And then what ultimately happens?
The man gets the fruit, so he must have been a good guy.
Right. And so it's sort of which is different than our first text, which has there's no there's no sort of like, if I'm good, I'll get it, and if I'm not good, at least my kid, the next generation will get it. There's none of that. It's just a straight no. The first text is I'm planting for the future. This text is I'd like to eat from it, but if not, then the next generation. Which one do you like? Anyone else? Similarities and differences? Rosalie.
Yeah, what I think is that the second text is to make us feel good because the first one didn't. So it's more positive and we have a good feeling about it. And it wasn't 70 years either. I mean, it's 3 years later. So it's a lot more positive. It's almost cleaning up the first version to make it better for us.
Yeah, and it's all, you could say that, and it's also like you don't get lost in sort of the supernatural aspects of it, like the time travel and the whole Rip Van Winkle. It's like it's a little bit more like believable, right? Like it's a little bit more.
And we don't get depressed because we're not lonely. I mean,
right. So it doesn't
and respected.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think the other thing is that the second giving of the fruit, they didn't have the whole story, and that's why the guy got bashed. Because I expected to be rewarded, but they didn't. Even though you said misogyny and all that, they didn't know.
No.
And they just make assumptions. We do that a lot. We just see the end part of the story, and then we think that that's the whole story, and that may not be the case. There's a lot more going on in the beginning. So anyway.
Okay. So so the second text, the figs, as opposed, if you look at it, if it's figs versus carob,
yeah,
right, and this is number 1 and this is number 2 in terms of texts that we did.
Versus carob,
right. So in this text, there's no supernatural elements, and it doesn't end. So this ends loneliness. And this ends, actually, if you look at it, if we're doing a compare, this ends celebration. Like he comes home and he's revered. His wife is like, you're a hero. Like he does the victory dance at home. He does like a touchdown dance. So much so that the neighbors hear him and then they want to replicate it, and then we're off on their own. But this text, he dies in this text, he dies in loneliness. And in this text, it's celebration. And so this text is down to earth, and this is supernatural. That's another interesting thing that I know it's backwards for you. I'm sorry, I can't do the, but so it's interesting that the text that's sort of more anchored, he comes home. The first text quickly becomes a text that's it's hard to do anything other than lose sight of all that intergenerational messaging when he dies alone, and that sort of steals the show. And that's the taste that we're left with. And in the second text with the figs, he comes home a hero. He's made his family rich, and he's proved his point to Hadrian. Other thoughts? Which text do you like better? Which do you find more?
I think the second one. I have a question though.
Yeah.
The Torah has 2 stories of Bereshit. Do the various texts do that? And they have 2 stories about similar things?
Yeah.
And I'm just curious.
Sure. Sure. So rabbinic literature often repeats itself, and a less sort of, the Torah, what I'd say is the Torah, there's definitely an attempt to kind of smooth over some of those and to take what's obviously 2 narratives and join them. Rabbinic literature doesn't do that. Like rabbinic literature just throws it all out there, and different commentators, like you'll point to different places. There's a lot more of that in rabbinic literature, and there's no attempt to kind of say like, oh, this is, like they have no problem throwing out these 2 stories that are so similar. Okay. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Dennis.
The second story, the one about the figs, accords with my very, very narrow view of the Talmud, which is about common sense and the way people are. And the incident with the neighbor trying to cash in seems like an ultimate Talmudic commentary on maybe on greed or whatever.
Right. I mean, it's almost like an aside, and it doesn't force you to. It doesn't force you, like, forget about the misogyny piece, because us to take the misogynistic piece and call it misogyny is culture. It's we're kind of we're using modern terms to define ancient behaviors, and that's not really, that's sort of out of bounds. So if you just look at it for what it was, that is, when it was, no one would have blinked an eye at that text. Like, oh yeah, like, I think Dennis is right. It's more of a statement of like, don't get greedy. At least that's the way they see it. Of course, we wouldn't, I'm not suggesting that we celebrate that. I'm just saying that the second text doesn't, you don't lose the nice, if you don't understand misogyny yet, then you don't have to sacrifice the nice ending. Right? Like, it's still like, oh, there's a nice text that teaches us about getting long life and doing things, for others. And then also there's a nice piece at the end reminding us not to be greedy. End of the story. As opposed to the first text, which is Choni, like, dies, completely isolated and from everybody. That's like, it's harrowing. Yes, this go ahead, Linda.
The difference, though, like, if you're just concentrating on doing something for the future generations, I think the story of Honi is much more altruistic and gets to that point more.
Good.
He was not expecting a reward of any kind.
Good, right. That's exactly right.
Just because you do good things in your life doesn't mean you're going to get a pot of gold at the end.
That's right. That's right. So some people, and Dr. Rubenstein in this book does a good job of kind of going back and forth with that. Like, on one hand, the second story is more down to earth, but the first, but over here we can, and I'm not sure if this is like a good comparison, but the first, like, this text is altruistic. But this text is sort of like, it's convenient. Like, oh yeah, if it doesn't work out for me, then everyone else can get it. But maybe that's more real, Linda. Like, I'd push back at you and say, all right, but like, really, like, how many people are going to be like Choni? And so, like, because the text doesn't shy away that that's supernatural what he does. And the guy goes to sleep for 70 years. And so, like, we're not like that. We're only, and the second text is more relatable because we're really more like that guy.
Yeah.
So the first text, the Honi text, is more altruistic, but does it lose something in its lack of realism? Other thoughts?
If I might interject, going back to the first text, never really talked about the question: can somebody fall asleep for 70 years and then dream? And they were comparing that to the Babylonian exile, when 2 generations essentially were erased from the Hebrew experience.
Actually, but were they? And in some ways, the whole story shows that you don't get erased, because Choni is remembered.
He's remembered, but he's remembered as a figure to be revered and quoted, and he doesn't exist anymore.
Right. And same thing with the exiles.
So he wasn't tested. What bothered me about the home scene, saying, "Hi, honey, I'm home."
Yeah.
Okay. They threw him out. They didn't test him. Okay. If you knew, well, what happened to Uncle Mendele back, when he planted something else, and he would have remembered that and been able to answer those questions. Same thing in the study hall. They didn't test him. if you're so smart, then tell me this. And that would have been the answer from Choni.
But Gary, let me just push here. I'll own up on it. I'm trying to think of an example where someone would say something so outrageous to you that you wouldn't like begin to. So, actually, I don't have it here, but in my prior pulpits, I always had like a little button, like it was the like time for this meeting to end and someone needs to come into the office.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because it's not safe. So early on in my career, a gentleman made an appointment with me, and I don't remember what, and so we sat down, and he started, I mean, he was ill, and he started telling me about how the office was bugged, and like it was, it was like the Iranian government, and I mean, it was really, really sad. It was really sad. I wasn't trying to ascertain whether or not he was telling me the truth. I wanted, like, he was acting erratic, and I wanted him, like, I was getting worried. I don't know how many of us, if someone said, like, I come from the 1800s, or, I'm Theodore Herzl, like, I'm not so sure I'd be like, oh, which river did you stand over when you had your dream? Like, I'm not sure I would do that.
Good point. However, having been in the public experience, I've dealt with many people, really strange people, particularly at board meetings where they would come up to the podium, and I remember Reverend Mesmer, she played the auto harp in between making her statements and trying to believe her. Then there was the nose bubbler, who was hard to look at, and we had.
What organization was this one?
This is the Rapid Transit District. Edith DeMilo was a constant person who was always running for mayor. But after she made her statement, somebody came up with no arms. Okay, and I've had crazies after crazies. Okay, yes, and I spent the time. I actually spent time to calm them down,
and security close by, maybe.
There was no security.
Oh, that's what you told me.
So, yeah, from my frame of reference, I would have given him a few tests before I said, "Wonderful seeing you."
Right. Okay, good. Jill, you wanted to add something to that?
No, there was nothing to add.
Do you want to play the harp before you speak?
Oh, yes.
The Choni, I think we would all agree that the Choni story, it's so harrowing the way it ends. It's so depressing, and and maybe the lesson, I don't know, I'm trying to I'm just thinking out loud now, is like, I wonder if he's like being punished for being such a literalist.
Oh, possible.
Yeah,
like he's such a literalist with it's like almost like God is saying with him, like, hands off the Tanakh, like, come on, don't be an idiot, like, all right, I'll prove you right that yes, you can, one can dream 70 years and it seems like an instant. I'm going to make it happen to you, but boy, is it going to be painful. Because it seems like it's such a ridiculous, like, his request is so ridiculous to prove, and it's so not, it's not very often in the Talmud where they start off with a piece, like, often biblical texts are brought in as proof texts. They're not brought in as like, oh, prove it true. It's a different utilization of the Bible. Like, you don't see a lot of the Talmud of like, oh, I doubt that was that, and so show me, and then there's a Talmudic story. That's very, I don't really recall that. Like, most of the time the Bible is brought in as the Bible says it, that's it. And so maybe this is trying to show, like, a reverence for the text. Like, okay, we'll show you, Choni, that one can dream 70 years like an instant in your life, but boy, is it going to be painful for you.
But there is a lesson I believe there is a lesson at the end of the story in that if you don't have friends, maybe you won't immediately die, but it is a very isolated and depressing way to live. And maybe it's a comment on the importance of relationships, just like generation to generation. And the fruit of friendship is what sustains you.
I mean, I think for sure that is the I mean, that it reminds us, like, in a way that your reach vertically in time can be achieved by what you do now, but don't forget it also has to be horizontal. Like, you have to have relationships.
Right. And certainly, I think we've learned that all the more so during the pandemic. People have really struggled with isolation. And, that's one of the reasons that High Neighbors became really meaningful to a lot of people. It's very hard to be isolated.
That's right.
Yeah.
I also, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I think it's a focus on humility too. Is that when he was revered, he was a superstar, let's face it. And what happens to even the superstars now? Very few of them actually survive 20, 30 years. I mean, there are a few, but it's sort of downhill, after you've been a superstar. And that's what Honi was. And he comes back and I think he has to learn to live differently now, that he's not Honi of the past anymore. He's now Honi of the present, which means that people forgot about him.
Right.
Don't
and he's not able to do it.
Can't be the same person anymore. So he has to make new friends. Can't have the old friends. I don't believe him anyway. So I don't know. I mean, we could look at it in different ways.
That's why I love these texts, because they're such I think that they're so interesting to, for sure the second text at least becomes a talk about intergenerational dependence, whereas the first text, it's hard to kind of focus on that because there's so much thrown into that first text, the Honi text.
Right.
All right, well, I hope that you enjoyed this study of these two vastly different yet very similar rabbinic stories, which again we are studied in honor of Tu B'Shvat, which is coming up. There'll be an email tomorrow, but most of the programming for the congregation will be virtual for the next few weeks, including, so this weekend will all be virtual again for Shabbat. And then or gradually for B'nai Mitzvah we'll use the Libo outdoor chapel for a while just to kind of try and mitigate risk. So, but all those announcements will be coming up online, kind of what we're occupying ourselves with now. But I appreciated this opportunity to teach because it got me to stop looking about Omicron and got me into Torah. So this was a fun way to spend an hour or so of preparation, just kind of looking at this text. So thank you for that. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
For being with us.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Have a
Bye.
good afternoon.
Bye.